Today's deep cut is Fallen from 1998, the American supernatural thriller film directed by Greg Hoblit and written by Nicholas Kazan. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back everyone. Today we are talking about Fallen from 1998, a deep cut, at least in my eyes, American supernatural thriller directed by Gregory Hoblit, written by Nicholas Kazan, of course, starring an amazing cast: Denzel Washington, John Goodman, Sutherland, just to name a few. All right, so before we get into it, make sure you smash that like button for me. Make sure you're subscribed. I see a lot of people that are watching the videos aren't subscribed yet. Why not? You're just missing good content. Make sure you're commenting on the videos. All of this means a lot and definitely appreciate your support. All right, so Fallen, 1998, a thriller / horror-ish type movie. I'm going to call it horror for this one. It's a really interesting movie, right? It's from a screenplay from Nicholas Kazan. Film tells a story about John Hobbes, a Philadelphia police detective who's investigating murders committed by an apparent copycat killer. Movie stars Denzel Washington, John Goodman, Sutherland, Embeth Davidtz, James Gandolfini and Elias Koteas. Released on January 16th in 1998 by Warner Brothers, the film grossed $25.2 million against its budget of $46 million. So, the director, Gregory Hoblit, directed a bunch of TV and then Primal Fear with Richard Gere before directing Fallen. He also directed Fracture with Anthony Hopkins and Ryan Gosling, as well as Untraceable with Diane Lane and Colin Hanks, and Heart's War with Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. I mean, somehow this guy just directs stars. It's pretty impressive. So, writer Nicholas Kazan, he writes screenplays for a bunch of films, but to me, this is his ceiling, right? It's the thing about Fallen is that most of the big time critics felt that the film had so much more potential than what the film offered. I feel like the execution of the film matches the story. We will all agree that the story was great. So, if you've ever seen Wes Craven's Shocker from 1989, I can't believe I actually have to say, if you've ever seen a Wes Craven film, that Shocker's not exactly widely loved. Fallen borrows some elements from Shocker. The main difference is that Shocker has way lesser known people. Again, when you just look at the cast of this film, you got stars in there, and even in 1998, Denzel was already huge. He had already starred in a lot of major motion pictures. So, the film opens up with the line, "I want to tell you about the time I almost died." Remember that line, because the movie goes full circle back to that line. It's just like every time I think about it, I get the chills, man. So the film makes amazing use of Stone's "Time's on My Sides." In a few scenes, it's a clue to Detective Hobbes, played by Denzel, that the killer, Edgar Reese, is near. Sympathy for the Devil's also in the film as well, but not nearly in as much as a prevalent role. The location of the film, Philadelphia, although it's really never mentioned. I grew up in Philly. In fact, the prison in the opening scene is Holmesburg Prison, located in Northeast Philadelphia. It opened in 1895, closed in 1996. I drove by that prison quite often. Basically, the I-95 highway would pass it, right? If you go, I would typically, to go into the center of Philadelphia, you'd have to go southbound, and the Holmesburg Prison was right there. Passed by it when it was open and it was closed. If I remember, I think they actually used to do some haunted houses in there as well after it closed. But I think what ended up happening is the building's not exactly so safe anymore, so they can't really have anything going on in there. It's kind of a shame. All right, so all of the cabin scenes were filmed in an area of New Jersey known as Pine Barrens. So, probably a little bit of a spoiler, but the trailer already shows scenes like this. The first scene, which writer Nicholas Kazan comes with for the film, was the scene where Azazel first passes from person to person. The scene which culminates with the possession of these characters. So Kazan was thinking about how evil can be passed from one person to another, like that it's somewhat contagious. If a person is nasty to another, the second person will be nasty to a third, and the third to a fourth. So, in thinking about this, he hit on the notion of, what may be like literalized, and came up with the scene. The rest of the movie sprang from that one scene, which is, there's a bunch of scenes. The one I'm thinking of mostly is just in the outside, where it's just going from person to person just by simple touch. Very powerful scene. So Fallen has Denzel ruling the screen. I think Donald Sutherland's always awesome. I was a little surprised by John Goodman. Can't say that I was a huge fan of his, but he was so good in this movie. And Kazan even said that he wrote the role of Jonesy for Goodman. Up until that movie, I guess I kind of knew Goodman from Roseanne. Was never really a fan of that show, pretty much because I never found Roseanne Barr to be funny. I didn't hate Goodman's role in the show. He was probably the one character that I could tolerate from the show. I just never thought of him as a dramatic actor. And he's actually come up with some really good dramatic roles. I immediately think of Fallen and 10 Cloverfield Lane. Of course, he lends his voice to characters in Transformers and video games. And of course, Sullivan from Monsters, Inc. as well. So, one thing to note, just be prepared. The film clocks in at over 2 hours. But I got to tell you, I don't feel it. It's just one of those movies that just, the pace is so well. To me, it feels like your average 90-minute film. I know it sounds weird to say because, time always moves at the same pace. But when you're engaged, you pay less attention to time. If you're bored with a film, all of a sudden it feels like things are dragging. With Fallen, I never feel like I'm watching a 2-hour movie. It's just because I guess I'm so engrossed in this thing. Let me tell you, I've seen this film so many times, it's not even funny. This used to be one of the films, when I was in school that probably was on like a weekly rotation, as crazy as that sounds. But I was weird. I used to watch a lot of Steven Seagal movies when I was in college as well, back in the old VHS days. And, I only had so many VHS tapes when I was a student. Fallen was one of them. Obviously, loved the movie. And I had like a bunch of Steven Seagal movies, I think up until like On Deadly Ground or something. I went through a cycle. Every night I was watching one of those. I have issues, I'll admit. But Fallen was definitely... I guess people would probably consider it to be a guilty pleasure of mine. I've never really thought of it that way. I am frankly shocked that a lot of people are as down on this movie as they are, to be honest. Alright, so to me, the highlights are Azazel passing from body to body. I love how Hobbes gets set up for murders that Azazel commits, but given the situation, Hobbes becomes public enemy number one. To me, it's not a wasted scene in a movie, and this is one of those movies that you see something new every time you watch it. And the name John Hobbes is based on two philosophers from the 17th century, which is kind of interesting. So Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Hobbes generally thought that men were evil and needed the constraints of society to make them better. Locke thought that men are thinking, rational creatures capable of peaceful coexistence. Both of these two themes are explored in the film. And maybe that's part of why this movie resonated with me. I was going through, philosophy classes and all in school at the time, and just piecing those things together, and then just seeing how deep the movie kind of goes into it. You could miss it. But for those of you who know, about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, you start to see all that stuff play out, and it's just really interesting. But, first and foremost, Fallen 1998, definitely a deep cut, in my opinion. Too many people haven't seen it. Too many people have seen it and said they didn't like it either. Shame on them. I would just suggest it. For those people, rewatch it and see what you think about it with fresh eyes. And for the ones that haven't watched it, what are you waiting for? You should have already tried to find, see where it's streaming on Amazon or Netflix or something. So that kind of wraps this video up. I definitely want to hear from you. Let me know what you think about Fallen. Let me know what other movies you want to see in the Deep Cut series. Also, let me know what other types of videos you like. We have playlists for Awesome or Awful series. We have deep dives, which are obviously a little more known movies, whereas deep cuts are the underground ones. Definitely love exploring the underrated. I always found it amazing when I found a movie that like nobody ever seemed to have heard of, and always just felt like, I don't know, won a Boy Scout badge or something like that. But all right, so definitely want to hear from you. Definitely want you to subscribe, hit that like button, comment for me. Until the next episode, just keep it horror.